The first sign that something was fundamentally wrong didn't come in the form of a shouting match or a dramatic confrontation. It arrived on a Tuesday morning as a standard piece of administrative mail, resting quietly on my desk at the Sanford Historical Foundation. It was a rejection letter from our health insurance provider. I managed the operations for our family's local civic trust, a well-funded organization my father, Edward, directed with an iron grip. As part of my compensation, my medical benefits covered my entire household, yet the document in my hand stated that my 7-year-old daughter, Lily, had been removed from the policy. The reason code cited a recent modification to the trust's bylaws, restricting dependent coverage strictly to lineal descendants by blood. Lily was adopted. We had welcomed her into our home when she was just 2 years old. My father had been the one to pay for the expensive agency fees, smiling for the photographs and shaking hands with the social workers. For 5 years, she was a Sanford. But sitting in my office, reading that sterile, automated letter, I realized a quiet, methodical erasure was underway. I didn't storm into my father's office. That was my flaw, the weakness that had defined my entire adult life. I was a man who preferred to manage conflicts behind the scenes, smoothing over the rough edges of my father's rigid personality to keep the peace and protect my position. I convinced myself there had to be a clerical error. I walked down the hall to Ian, the foundation's external accountant, expecting him to roll his eyes and fix a mistyped code. Instead, Ian wouldn't look me in the eye. He shuffled a stack of invoices, his voice dropping to a low murmur, as he explained that Edward had spent the last 3 months restructuring the foundation's legal framework. The new clauses explicitly defined family members through genetic testing and biological proof, effectively walling off the foundation's considerable assets, healthcare stipends, and educational funds. Ian told me it was just estate planning, a way to protect the Historical Society from future frivolous lawsuits. When I finally brought it up to my father later that afternoon, he didn't raise his voice. He was standing by the window of his office, looking out at the municipal archives building we funded. He spoke with the calm, rational tone of a man explaining the weather. He told me that legacy was a biological imperative. He said he loved Lily, but that the Sanford name carried a genetic weight, a specific lineage that needed to be preserved against dilution. He said she was a wonderful girl, but legally and historically, she could never truly share our roots. He framed it as a harsh but necessary reality of wealth management. I stood there swallowing the bile in my throat, and I nodded. I told myself I was buying time. I told myself I could secure Lily's future with my own salary, that I didn't need his trust fund. I stayed completely silent about the depth of my anger because I was terrified of losing the foundation I had spent 15 years helping to build. My cowardice only accelerated the problem. The exclusion bled from legal documents into our daily lives. At the annual foundation gala, Lily's name was left off the printed program for the children's processional. During the holidays, my mother gifted my nephews antique silver pocket watches that had belonged to our ancestors, while handing Lily a generic, store-bought plastic toy, whispering that the watches were for the real heirs. The isolation was suffocating, and I watched my bright, energetic daughter slowly become quiet, retreating into herself whenever my parents were in the room. She was absorbing the unspoken rule that she was a guest in her own life. The turning point came not from a place of righteous anger, but from a dusty box of archival records. Fiona, a freelance genealogist the foundation had hired to digitize our local history, asked me to review some of the older files before they were scanned into the public database. Fiona was meticulous, an outsider who cared only about dates, stamps, and factual accuracy. She pointed out a discrepancy that had been bothering her for weeks. She showed me a series of municipal tax records from the early 1950s. My grandfather, the man who had established the Sanford Historical Foundation, had filed his taxes as a household of 2 for 5 consecutive years, after my father Edward was supposedly born. Fiona then pulled up my father's birth certificate. It wasn't an original hospital record. It was a delayed registration, filed mathematically 5 years after his date of birth, signed by a sympathetic local judge rather than an attending physician. There were no medical records of my grandmother ever being pregnant, no hospital bills, no christening photographs until my father was suddenly a toddler in the family portraits. Fiona didn't know the context of my family's current civil war. She just thought it was an interesting historical puzzle, suggesting that perhaps the great Edward Sandford had been born out of wedlock and hidden away for a few years. But I knew my grandfather. He was a man obsessed with appearances, much like my father. A delayed birth certificate wasn't a sign of a hidden scandal. It was the hallmark of a closed, private arrangement. I realized I needed the original, unredacted legal files from that era. Those documents weren't held in our municipal archive. They were sitting in the long-term storage facility of the retiring lawyer who had managed my grandfather's estate 40 years ago. Accessing those files wasn't simple. They were strictly confidential, sealed under attorney-client privilege. To get them, I had to abuse my executive authority. I drafted a formal legal request, claiming the foundation was undergoing a comprehensive financial and historical audit required by the state tax board. I forged my father's signature on the authorization mandate. It was a massive risk. If I was caught, it wouldn't just be a family dispute, it would be corporate fraud. I paid the exorbitant expedited retrieval fees using my own personal savings, draining the account I had started for Lily's college fund. It felt like I was burning my own house down to find a single match, but the quiet humiliation I had allowed my daughter to endure demanded a price I was finally willing to pay. The investigation took 3 agonizing weeks. During that time, my father finalized the new trust bylaws. He scheduled a routine board meeting on a Friday afternoon to formally sign the documents that would legally sever Lily from any future association with the Sandford estate. He invited the board of directors, the foundation's legal counsel, and me. He wanted me there to witness it, to silently consent to the new order, just as I had consented to everything else in my life. I sat at the long mahogany table as the board members chatted about local zoning laws and upcoming charity events. My father sat at the head, radiating the quiet, absolute authority of a man who believed his bloodline gave him a divine right to govern. He slid the new bylaws across the table, the thick stack of paper bound in blue leather. He gave a brief, polished speech about the importance of heritage, about protecting the roots of the Sandford tree from the unpredictable winds of the modern world. As he uncapped his pen to sign the document, the heavy wooden doors of the boardroom opened. My assistant stepped in, looking nervous, carrying a thick, brown, wax-sealed envelope. I had tracked the courier's progress all morning. I stood up, walked over, and took it from her. The room went silent. My father frowned, asking what could possibly be so urgent that it required interrupting a board vote. I walked back to my seat, placed the heavy envelope on the table, and looked at my father. I didn't yell, I didn't make a scene. I used the exact same calm, rational tone he had used when he stripped my daughter of her health care. I told the board that before we finalized a legally binding document, restricted entirely to biological genetic descendants of the Sandford line, we needed to ensure the foundation's archives were historically accurate. I broke the wax seal. Inside was a fragile, yellowed folder from 1952. It contained a finalized decree from the state orphanage. I pulled out the original document and slid it across the polished wood right on top of his new bylaws. It was a closed adoption record. The paperwork detailed the transfer of a 5-year-old boy, originally named Thomas, from the state ward into the care of my grandparents. My grandfather had used his wealth and influence to seal the records, change the boy's name to Edward, and file a delayed birth certificate to make it appear as though the child was his own flesh and blood. The silence in the room was absolute. My father stared at the yellowed paper. He recognized my grandfather's distinct heavy signature at the bottom. He saw the state seal. For 70 years, he had built his entire identity, his arrogance and his exclusionary worldview on the absolute superiority of his genetic lineage. In 3 seconds, the paper on the table proved he didn't share a single drop of Sandford blood. Ian, the accountant, leaned over, adjusting his glasses to read the decree. He looked up at my father, his face pale, realizing the legal catastrophe that had just occurred. By drafting and enforcing the new bylaws that strictly required biological proof of lineage to access or control the foundation's assets, my father had just legally disinherited himself. He had written the exact clauses that now stripped him of his authority, his title, and his control over the trust. My father didn't explode in rage. The color simply drained from his face. His hands, usually so steady and commanding, began to tremble as he touched the edge of the adoption decree. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and hollow, searching for a defense, a justification, a loophole. But there was none. He was everything he had accused my daughter of being. He was the outsider. I didn't stay to watch the lawyers scramble to freeze the foundation's assets. I didn't stay to hear the board members demand an emergency recess. I packed up my briefcase, left my keys to the office on the table, and walked out of the building. The fallout was bureaucratic and exhaustive. The state intervened, freezing the trust while the probate courts untangled the massive legal paradox my father had created. He was forced to step down as director pending the investigation. I lost my job, and because the assets were frozen, I lost any financial safety net I had relied on. The social standing I had protected for so long evaporated overnight. My parents stopped calling, retreating into their sprawling home, isolated by the sudden, brutal collapse of their manufactured legacy. But the silence in my own house changed. It was no longer the heavy, anxious quiet of waiting for the next subtle rejection. A few months later, on a warm Saturday afternoon, I was in the backyard with Lily. We had bought a small, neglected house on the edge of town, far from the historical district. She was kneeling in the dirt, her hands covered in mud, carefully placing tomato seedlings into the soil. I knelt beside her, helping her pack the earth around the fragile roots. She looked at me, a smudge of dirt on her nose, and asked if these plants would grow big enough to feed us by the summer. I told her that as long as we watered them and took care of them together, they would grow exactly where they were planted. Assuming you are looking for the second segment of a standard 3-part educational marketing script, here is a highly versatile template focused on overcoming challenges and introducing your core framework. Part 2. The hidden obstacle. The re-engagement hook. Welcome back. In our last session, we uncovered the foundational steps to unlocking your true potential. But today we need to address the elephant in the room. Why do so many people follow the exact same blueprint, yet only a fraction actually see real results? The answer is not about working harder, it is about working completely differently. The metaphor. Imagine you are driving a high-performance sports car. You have a full tank of gas, the best tires, and a clear map to your destination. But no matter how hard you press the accelerator, you can barely brake 20 miles per hour. Why? Because your emergency brake is still secretly engaged. This is exactly what happens when we rely on outdated strategies. We press the gas pedal of hustle and grind, but our invisible limits keep us completely stuck. The core problem, focusing on adding more tasks instead of removing friction. The realization, true momentum comes from releasing the brake, not just pressing the gas. The shift, transitioning from a mindset of addition, doing more, to subtraction, eliminating what holds you back. The action plan. Once you release that brake, your growth becomes nearly effortless. You stop fighting the vehicle and start enjoying the speed. But how do you identify exactly what is holding your specific engine back? That is exactly why I created a comprehensive resource to help you diagnose and release those hidden brakes today. Next step. Click the link below to download my exclusive ebook, The Frictionless Engine. 5 Strategies to Accelerate Your Growth. This guide dives deep into the exact framework I used to double my results in half the time. The teaser for Part 3. Download the ebook right now and start reading. Tomorrow in Part 3 we are going to take this exact framework and show you how to scale it on autopilot, so you can step back and watch the system work for you. See you in the next video. Does this structure fit the narrative of your overall series? Or would you like me to adjust the core message to match a specific niche like health, real estate, or relationships? Part 3. The Autopilot Blueprint. The Final Hook. Welcome to the third and final installment of our series. In Part 1 we laid down the foundational blueprint. In Part 2 we identified and released the hidden brakes slowing you down. Now it is time to talk about the ultimate goal. Scale. How do you take a system that works and make it work for you even when you are not in the room? The metaphor. Think of the difference between carrying buckets of water and building a pipeline. When you first start out, you are the one carrying the buckets. Every drop of success requires your direct physical and mental effort. If you stop walking, the water stops flowing. But the most successful individuals do not just get stronger at carrying buckets, they spend their time engineering a pipeline. Once the pipes are connected and the valves are open, the water flows on its own. The manual trap. Trading hours directly for outcomes, which limits your growth to the 24 hours in a day. The pipeline shift. Investing time up front to build repeatable systems and automated workflows. The ultimate freedom. Reclaiming your time while your output continues to multiply exponentially. The action plan. To build your own pipeline, you need to step out of the daily operations and step into the role of the architect. It is about replacing yourself in the lowest leverage tasks so you can focus entirely on high-impact decisions. Here are the 3 pillars to achieve this transition. Audit your time. Track every action you take for 3 days. Highlight anything that does not require your unique expertise. Automate and delegate. Use software to handle repetitive tasks and outsource the administrative work to experts. Establish standard operating procedures, SOPs. Document the exact steps for your most successful strategies so anyone can replicate your results. Next step. If you want the exact templates and automation blueprints we use to build these pipelines, it is time to take the final step. Click the link below to enroll in the Pipeline Masterclass. We will take everything you learned in the Frictionless Engine ebook and turn it into a self-sustaining machine. The send-off. Thank you for joining me in this 3-part journey. The tools are now in your hands. It is time to stop carrying buckets and start building your legacy. Click the link below and I will see you on the inside.